A12. Dr. Marsh.
How are you?
Good.
It's good.
That's for you. It's on this.
Man.
A12. Yeah, so they've got one.
How many mics we got?
Clay, this is Clay. He knows. He put it here. Those
We got 4 mics in front.
three.
3.
There's 7, but she has a mic, so
Okay.
like
For you. So I've got 1 mic. I got 3 mics for the people, so we're
Okay. Well, I think I started off up there.
okay.
What? What do you want me to do?
If you want to
Okay.
start,
So
or
I'm gonna give you this mic.
okay, thank you. Okay, I could hold it. I think I saw you at the LGBT center.
Yes. That's it. You and me, we start 5 minutes. Okay. Guys.
Okay. Sure. Moving. Yeah. To diversify. Yeah. Want to swap here? We could like swap. So it's not like all the yeah. Hi, I'm Dr. Zoka. I'm one of the bariatric surgeons. Zoka. Yeah. It's a long story. I'm originally from California, but I did my bariatric fellowship, and I'm really so I thought I would come to a state that suffers with a lot of obesity burden. Yeah. So happy to be. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, nice.
I see that.
Yeah. Yeah. We're also developing medically supervised. So, people who aren't good. We also. More David. You got it. I just came from clinic. And what's yours? Okay. Okay. Do you have practice? Well, I will say I was almost like but didn't feel like so yeah, exactly. And so then, black oh everyone's white. Well that's not
But
the
that's
point. I mean like it,
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, sounds good. So this is a really special town hall meeting, and I'm Clay Marsh, and I want to start this off, and I'm going to turn it over to David Freisen, who is our Vice President of, I'll get all the titles, of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the university. But this conference, this town hall meeting, was really stimulated by an email connect from Lisa Costello, who's coming from her clinic, so she'll be here just in a few minutes. And she suggested that we respond to the issues that happen in Charlottesville, which to me are emblematic of this sort of what I see as a fear and a feeling of isolation and separation of many people in our country. And when you look, so I'm a fan of reading, and there's a great book by Tom Friedman. Tom Friedman's an editorial writer for the New York Times, and it's called An Optimist View to the Age of Acceleration. And the idea that Tom Friedman puts out is that things are rapidly changing, and today it's more about networks of influence than it is just building places. And in the day, there were high-wage salaries for medium-skilled jobs, and no longer does that exist. And that things are very much flat across the world because of the internet and digital technology and connectivity, that for many people, they feel left out. And this idea that in today's world, some people feel that they've lost social capital, that they've gone from being important and empowered and good and loved to perhaps not feeling the same way about themselves. And as we evolved as people, then community and connection and cooperation were really important, not only for success, but actually for survival. And so I believe that's the reason why isolation and feeling abandoned or alone is perhaps the most damaging health thing that can happen to a person. So if you're an animal of any sort and you don't feel loved or connected to your parents and to your community, that's a very big negative driver of poor health. So as we look today, as I looked at the Charlottesville experience, then to me, I didn't see as much hate and violence and all that. I saw a ton of people that were incredibly scared and feeling very isolated, feeling left behind. And as our egos start to try to understand what our place is in the world, then fear oftentimes makes us see things separately. But Albert Einstein said E equals mc squared, which means energy is matter. And if you go at quantum physics below every particle, the smallest particle that exists, all that's left at the bottom is energy. So I think we're all connected. We're all droplets of the same ocean. We're all part of the energy of the universe. And although we look different, I think we're really all the same. And so as we look at community and look at diversity, we know that if you have a crowd of people that have a distributed set of understandings versus a single expert, and you give the two a problem, the expert does less well than the crowd does. So diversity enhances not only our intelligence, our group intelligence, but it enhances our experiences. And maybe we're all out there trying to create and get experiences to bring back to the ocean. So today's conversation that I hope that we have, and I'll turn over to David here in a minute, will be one that will be positive, trying to seek an understanding in our community and trying to create the safety and the love and the acceptance so that people can be authentic. They can speak their mind. They can detail what they believe, but they don't try to look at other people as people that are their competitors or their enemies. And in fact, we all share this planet, and as I said, I think we're all droplets of the same ocean. So I hope at the end of this we come out with an understanding about how we can embrace each other's differences without necessarily rejecting each other as the value of the people and the differences you bring. And I hope that, so I'm going to stop talking, and what we'll do is David's going to make a few introductory comments, Vice President Freisen, and then we're going to invite our panelists, and we'll introduce them one by one to make short comments, and then we want to take questions. And we do have some questions that were already submitted, so we can go to those, but we want to make this an interactive discussion because this is really about our community, about the world we want to live in, and it's about bringing love and safety and acceptance to our home. So, David.
Thank you, Clay. Good afternoon. I think this town hall is extremely important. I thank Clay for thinking ahead to do this. Because I think one of the things that we're trying to do at West Virginia is deal with the whole idea of how we correctly manage diversity. Because so often when we think about diversity, we immediately think about differences. But our definition at West Virginia University of diversity is pretty broad. And that diversity is a collection of similarities and differences wherever you find them. And so when you really look close enough, we all share this human experience, which should bring us together. But historically, we have not always managed diversity well. And by not managing it well, we really do lead to fear. And so what we can do in places like this is start to deal with issues, start to dispel myths. And I think it is very important that this whole idea of us being one WVU gives us a baseline that we can embrace one another. One of the antidotes to fear is knowledge. And so the whole idea of fear can be false evidence appearing real. And when we embrace one another, we find out that we many times have much more in common than we do have differences. It's very important for us here at West Virginia University and actually throughout the nation to have safe places to have difficult conversations. Because I do think that we need to have difficult conversations, dealing with our past, dealing with how we have been separated. But we need to have these safe spaces to have these conversations, even if the conversations have tension. And I think the way we manage tension is very important. Martin Luther King once said that there's really two different kinds of peace. He says that there's a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, but there is a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And what we're trying to do here today and throughout the campus is to have a place where our baseline is one of justice, and with a baseline of justice that we can embrace one another as we move forward. Thank you.
I also love the quote, and it just reminded me as David was talking, that we see things not as they are, but we see things as we are, which I think is really powerful. So next, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Sheila Price. And Sheila is Associate Dean of Dentistry and also has led our Diversity Task Force. And these are, I think everybody's a member of the task force, is that right? Maybe not Renee. Okay, so I'm going to let you, Sheila, if you want to. No? Okay, so introduce the people in the task force and make a short comment, and then I'll introduce the other speakers if you can. And I don't know if you need my cheat sheet.
Is this working? Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very essential and special conversation. Engagement is the starting line for change and improvement. And I want to first of all acknowledge Dr. Marsh, Dr. Clay Marsh, for his leadership in that regard, not only in organizing this time together to initiate a very important conversation within the whole house of the Health Sciences Center, but also in bringing together our task force last year to begin unpacking some of the issues and also starting to look at some of the solutions that we may have in regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion here at Health Sciences. I would like to, before I do any introductions, I would like to just start from my vantage point. When I think about diversity, inclusiveness, and change, I just say something super simplistically, and that is, if it is to be, it's up to me. And I hope that we will all embrace that concept before leaving here today. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has already been quoted. I think of him as our quarterback of change relative to equity, diversity, inclusiveness, and particularly nonviolence in the approach to change. And may I just quote from him directly. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I would ask again that we use this quotation in some of Dr. King's teachings as a framework for our discussion today. Out of his efforts over time, the mountain of despair came a stone of hope. Those of you that have visited his memorial will see that. I see this occasion as an opportunity for us to just expand that stone of hope within health sciences. Also, the title of today's talk, Town Hall, is appropriately titled. That is after Charlottesville. Charlottesville left us with some very prominent and unsightly, painful images. We saw people on one side expressing hate, fear. We saw people on another side expressing hate, fear. We saw one person get into a Dodge Charger and cause the ultimate expression of hate, and that is loss of life. I ask that we use that as a little symbolism, that every time we see a dark gray Dodge Charger, that we don't grimace and think that that is going to be a weapon of violence. When we see people that look different than us, that we're not going to automatically stereotype and put people in boxes or put circles around them. So again, back to our title, After Charlottesville. the image changed, didn't it? In our media? What happened nationally? Harvey, Irma. Suddenly, we saw hate dissolve into expressions of love, humanity, harmony, unity. Those vivid expressions in Charlottesville suddenly dissolved in my thinking. And I would hope that as an audience here today, that we began this discussion by thinking after Charlottesville, the ultimate expression of the American way, the American spirit. And that is that we embrace everyone. There are no delineations in terms of our nationality, ethnicity, our economic status, our educational status. And I apologize, you told us no speeches, but this is a topic that I have a great passion about. So again, let's start this discussion with after Charlottesville. It is really a deep-seated pleasure of mine to recognize with utmost honor and pride the members of our diversity task force that work tirelessly in the midst of just incredibly busy schedules, as we all maintain here at the Health Sciences Center. They added this to their plate, and some of them are with us today. Dr. Sam Cotton. Sam and I started this diversity journey about 25 years ago, when we referred to it more frequently as social justice here at Health Sciences Center. I had the utmost pleasure of seeing Dr. Lisa Costello evolve from a student who advocated equity and inclusiveness to now being a budding professional in pediatric dentistry, assistant professor, correct? Pediatric medicine, yeah. Okay, erase that one, yes. Well, we embrace you in dentistry as well. Yeah, and Nitsa Moti, you are the ultimate expression and example of unity to your classmates here in the School of Medicine, but beyond and within all the boundaries here at the Health Sciences Center. You have done some remarkable things, and we thank you for everything. She took time from being a busy medical student to serve on that task force. And I really don't feel properly equipped to introduce the other members of the panel, but I do want to say that we had a total of 13 individuals on the task force representing all 5 schools here in the Health Sciences Center. And we rolled up our sleeves, and I think that it was a wonderful starting line for us, and thus let the conversation continue today.
Thank you, Sheila. And I will also finish out our panel introduction by introducing Renee Nicholson. Renee is Assistant Professor of Multidisciplinary Studies in the Eberly College and has done a tremendous amount of work in our cancer program related to creating a program of narratives of patients undergoing chemotherapy. And Renee has also worked with us to look at narratives more broadly, which is really powerful. And also Dr. Nova Soka, who's Assistant Professor of Surgery and Bariatric Surgery, who's going to join us. And I would like to invite the other panelists to go ahead and make a few introductory comments. And maybe you want to start at Sam and go across Sheila and go down that way?
Okay, well, I am different. First off, I want to make sure you know I'm hanging on to summer. So I'm wearing summer clothes instead of fall colors at my... Okay, I use humor to help diffuse some of the challenges I think I've faced over the last 25 years. Before I even came here, I will tell you one thing that told me it was okay for me, and at that time my partner, to come here, was I looked at the back, because I was an alumnus from the Charleston campus, and I looked at the back of one of the flyers that had been sent to the house, one of the magazines from WVU, and it had the non-discrimination policy. And Karen was kind of contemplating, oh, do we, don't we do this? Do we, don't we do this? And I said, oh my God, look here, honey. It says they don't discriminate based on blah, 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 and sexual orientation. And I was like, it's kismet. It's got to be meant to be. So we came here, and I will tell you, over the last 25 years, it was very difficult being in the military at the same time, because as you all know, it wasn't until 2010, and unfortunately a month after I retired, that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was rescinded finally. And that made it very challenging in terms of how out I could be, the fear myself. The very first week I was here, my colleagues wanted to introduce me. Oh, she's in the military, she's a flight nurse, and one of my little sophomore, 18-year-old students came up and says, oh, you must know my daddy. He works in the Adjutant General's office in Charleston. And I thought I was going to throw up, because I was going to be outed, I was going to be kicked out of the military, and thankfully none of that happened. I have had nothing, I won't say nothing, but mostly really embracing and positive experiences here. And the experiences that I have had, once as a doctoral student, when I was in clinic with a patient who was obviously not very embracing of diversity. He knew I was in the military, I had a pin on or something, and I said, oh, have you served? And he said there was no way I would ever serve with those in people. And I was mortified, and I was a doctoral student. All I could think of to say back to him was, well, sir, we'll just have to agree to disagree, because I couldn't disagree with you more. And I felt like it was my obligation to set that line in the sand right then and right there with that patient. He could have his views, his beliefs. Of course, Tony Parvani was the attending, and he almost had a coronary when I told him what happened, but that's another whole story. I've been grateful to be involved in some diversity issues here. I watched with sadness events at Charlottesville and other places around the country, and I do see it happen every single day with others, not myself, because I don't look like someone else that's different. As one of my bosses said to me, and this was something that was pretty unbelievable, was, you wear it so well. And that's how that's why people liked me, because I wore it so well. On a veteran status side, I had a colleague who took care of some of my patients while I was gone. Now, mind you, I served twice in a war zone, was getting shot at every day, mortared, blah, blah, blah. I came back and was shell-shocked myself, and the first thing this colleague said to me was, I did my service for the country. I took care of your patients while you were gone. I'm going to pass it along.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Dr. Marsh and everyone on the panel for inviting me. I've been in West Virginia for a year as the bariatric surgeon, so working with patients to get healthier. And just to really reiterate what Dr. Marsh said about E=mc², we are all connected. And so one thing, I love going out places and watching people. And a couple weeks ago, I think I had, what was an epiphany to me is that we all like to feel special and individual. Every one of us, for whether what we wear, what we say, how we act. We want to be different, but there's also a big part of us. Everybody likes to feel connected as a community, and I think that is the crux of being human. And so we all know in the news, we are living through a very polarized time in our country, on a national level, on the Charlottesville level, and also, as a state, West Virginia is very interesting. I cannot claim to be an expert. I have just been traveling around this year, going to different places to learn more about the state. But our state has a pretty rich history and challenges that come along with that in terms of we're a rural state, we are an underserved state, and sometimes in terms of diversity, at least in terms of skin color and those things, we are not as diverse as other places I've lived. I grew up in San Francisco. I went to college in New York City. And so coming here, has been a shift. And I think a lot of us feel, well, what can I do to improve the community with my own individual self? And so I think listening and really being open to people who are different. So whether that means as a Caucasian person, people of color, they have a different experience than I do And so I probably make some assumptions about things they like, things they don't like, and these can be based on stereotypes, people of other religions, people of other sexual orientations. It's very easy to make assumptions, and I think as a community, one thing we can learn to do better is to listen and create space so we can understand each other as individuals. What makes this one specific individual special? They like to wear pink shoelaces, and that's different than everybody else. And my hope is through dialogue and being patient with each other, because a lot of feelings can come up when we start bringing up these topics. We can learn more about each other and become a better community.
Yeah.
I think I want to underscore one thing that you said, listening. That's really the art of embracing diversity and being inclusive. As a Southern West Virginia girl who grew up in a first-generation college family, my father always instilled one thing. He says, use the anatomy that God gave you in the proportion that he gave. What's that? 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you talk. And it's amazing what you can learn when we do genuinely, actively listen to those who are perhaps across the table from us, different from us. So thanks for bringing out that point.
Is this on? All right. I'm Lisa Costello. I actually work in the 2 departments, internal medicine and pediatrics, and I'm going to quote someone different because I also like quotes, but I'm going to quote the Holocaust survivor and activist Elie Wiesel, who said the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And so I don't know if I have any unique perspective to give being up on this panel. I think the reason I'm up here is because I was watching all the events. I'm a #Tweediatrician, so I was following it on social media. And after having served on the diversity task force, I served on the communication arm, and we felt that it was very important that as a health science center, we create an open dialogue so that we could discuss and subsequently, importantly, listen to the different perspectives that we have here. And as Mountaineers, we go first. And so I decided to email my vice president and said, hey, Dr. Marsh, I'm watching all of this on TV, and I was on this task force, and we said, you know, it would be really good if we talked about these things. And he was like, that's a great idea. This was the first week of school, mind you, so I knew that he wanted to welcome all the students. He wrote a blog post, and then when you suggest something to happen, you get to be volunteered for it. So I think, you know, so that we can get to the comments, because I really do want to create that dialogue. I just came from a conference that was focusing on mindfulness, and I took the survey this morning that they're sending out about how we can create a more mindful HSC. And an exercise that I think we could just pause that we did the very first time when we were on the diversity task force is think of the first time you encountered diversity. I'll let you pause and just think back in your life. When was the first time you encountered diversity? For me, it was when I was in kindergarten, and my kindergarten class raised money for the Jerry Lewis Telethon, and we went, and I got to present the check, and it was the first time in my life I had ever seen someone in a wheelchair. And so for me, going back and then looking at the different parts where we've embraced diversity, whether it's disabilities or different cultures or different sexual orientations, we all have been exposed to diversity, but how can we be more welcoming to it and create that environment here? So I think we're going to get to some of the comments later, but appreciate the opportunity to share, and hope in that reflection when you think about when your first experience with diversity was, how can you continue to cultivate that and move it forward here in our community at WVU?
My name's Nishta. I'm a third-year medical student. I was born and raised in India and then moved to New York City, then moved to upstate New York, then moved to DC, then moved to Kenya, and now I am in Morgantown, West Virginia. I never thought that I would.
It's the usual track people take to get.
Absolutely. I never thought I would be living in a place where I would have to drive to a grocery shop. So this is amazing that I could drive and go to places. When Dr. Sheila Price asked me that I should be on a panel, on a diversity panel, the first thing that came to my head was, that is insane, because you know I have no filter. And it's a bad idea. I still don't have my MD. I need to put my filter on. But I understand that there are a lot of emotions in this room, and whatever's that's going on in the country, in the past we didn't really talk about it, but now with the events that are happening around the country and around the world, it's become important to express how you feel. So the only thing I'm going to say today is keep it real, and let's go from here and let's keep talking.
So I'm a poet, and as a poet, I think about stories all the time. And I've been lucky to be around healthcare professionals and patients for a couple of years now. I actually spend more time with healthcare professionals and patients than I do other poets. I think that's an advantage. One of the unique things that you have as health professionals is that you receive stories all the time. People always are telling you a story. And I think that's really a gift. And I wonder too if there's an opportunity to give a story. Because I think that stories matter. And when we let them work on us, good things happen.
Very good. Well, thank you to our panel. And I think that you guys get the frame of what we're trying to do, which is to have a very open and transparent and real dialogue, but do it in the context of trying to continue to evolve our own community. Because at the end of the day, this is the community that we own. And I think for many people, when you start to look at the world at large and you see a lot of things happening that are very negative in the way that they're portrayed, a lot of noise. If you watch the news shows, people are screaming for attention, et cetera. But I think people are really seeking something that's more foundational, more sort of back to where we came from. And I've always said that coming back here after graduating from undergraduate medical school here, growing up in Charleston, and then going to Ohio State for 30 years and coming back, I feel like I'm living Field of Dreams. And I mean that from the very positive way, which is getting back to our foundation. And I think people are coming because everybody is really, really hungry for purpose and for the right kind of community. And you know, Google did a study and looked at their best teams and asked what separated their best teams from all other teams. They measured everything because they're Google, and the only thing they found different was a higher degree of psychological safety on their best teams. And when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, bases physiology, you need your heart to beat, you need to breathe. Then it's safety, physical and emotional. Then it's love, then self-esteem, then self-actualization. So we are a place that I believe has a very strong spiritual underpinning to be able to rebuild these kind of communities that starts to reconnect people back to what makes us healthy and makes us thrive. So we have 2 microphones. We would welcome anybody that have questions. Please come up and use the microphones. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, raise your hand and we'll move the microphones to you. But we really want to hear from you guys. I'm going to ask a question, and instead of everybody answering, we'll try to go back and forth so everybody will have a chance to comment, but I want to make sure that we do have a discussion. And it always starts slow, but I'm sure somebody will break the ice and then we'll go. So one of the questions that people submitted was, if I see people that are different, how do I go up to them and start a conversation that's not threatening and that's not awkward? So what would you guys suggest?
Just do it. Just do it. Just start the conversation. It's amazing when you reach out to people how they will reach back. And maybe you are the voice that they've been waiting on, particularly if they're in a fairly homogeneous environment where they are in a minority. They would welcome, I would say, most often, I certainly do, someone embracing me and wanting to bring me into the fold. So start the conversation.
Good.
Yeah, I personally respond to compliments very well. So, you know, this suit, for
You
example.
look great, by the way. And you're such a great personality. No.
Great. Well, then that's I think a good way to approach anyone. Sometimes, you know, specifically, you know, I wear a lot of suits, and sometimes people are confused about why I wear suits, etc. So they'll come and talk to me about it. I think if people are looking different, really just going up and being curious is very fine. I think this issue can come up specifically in the LGBT community in two ways. You know, there are some people who are very visibly gay. Maybe they wear suits like myself, they dress in a certain way that appears gay, probably gay, but don't make any assumptions there, you know. Even myself, I've probably assumed some people are gay when they're not, and that doesn't go over very well. So I think it's like a comedy routine. It's not even a town hall. But what I would say for differences is being open, asking questions. And I think for a lot of the LGBT community, at least in healthcare, one of the needs they have is actually being identified. Because a lot of people who are in the LGBT community, you can't tell by looking. You really do need to ask. And in fact, while I was in my fellowship at Duke, I tried to do research into finding LGBT bariatric patients. And what we found is because we weren't asking patients as they came through our clinic during intake, we didn't ask, it didn't come up, it's very hard to find them. So sometimes if people are visually different, that's great. There's a point of topic you can start with, but for people who they may be different and you don't know, it's very important to ask.
The only other thing I wanted to add to that, because I don't think I'm serving through the American Academy of Pediatrics on a diversity task force for our district, and what we did was we actually found out about ourselves. So we all have implicit bias. There's bias all around us, and so we don't have one at our institution, but there's an institution in the north in Boston known as Harvard that has a quiz that you can take. Not that anybody wants more tests, because I'll be the first to tell you I don't like taking tests, but you can actually take tests on different areas to determine what your personal biases are. And so I think knowing yourself is really important when you're talking about cultivating diversity, because you got to know yourself. And I think we just kind of talked about that a little bit, of assumptions we might make, you know, what happens when you assume. So I think knowing yourself is really important in it too, and that's been something that I've been enlightened to, and going on and taking those or listening. There's a lot of different TED Talks, but just learning more about your own personal feelings, and then being okay with engaging with others and learning different perspectives.
I think that's good. If I could just add in one thing. I think a lot of times when you have a problem with somebody else, the real problem lies within you. And so I think a lot of times seeing all this as a reflection of perhaps you not feeling safe or feeling loved yourself becomes important. Please.
I think it's important, though, that when we deal with someone that may be different from us, that we not start with the differences, that we start with the commonality. Because we can always find a commonality with someone. And if we start with the differences, then we do run the risk of maybe being offensive or maybe people not understanding. But when we start on common ground, and the one thing that we have in common with everyone else is our humanity. And so rather than focusing on differences, I think it's very important for us to focus on the fact that we're all part of this human thread. And then from relationships, based on relationships, which I believe are everything, based on relationship, then we can start to try to understand the differences.
One of the simple things that we could do is, if you are trying to learn about somebody else or somebody else's culture, just acknowledge the fact that you're trying to learn. Let them know that, hey, you know, I don't know much about India, or I don't know much about this culture, but is this how you do it? For example, I had somebody, I'm Indian, so I like to eat rice with my hands because that's how I was raised. And somebody had asked me that, do people in India know how to use utensils? I thought that was the stupidest question, but what they could have said that, hey, you know, I don't know much about India, but do most people in India eat with their hands? So how you frame it and how you acknowledge the fact that you are trying to learn. The second question was not stupid. The first one was.
That's good. Let me pose another question, and please, we would welcome any questions from the audience. Another question that was generated, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but what about people that feel that they are not being accepted here at WVU, whether it's in a professional setting or in a student setting, because of looking different or having a different set of values, et cetera. How do we start to address that from a professional and from a student standpoint?
So I think one of the areas that I've encountered a lot, and I think a lot of our learners are experiencing as well, is, I'm a physician, so what do I do when a patient doesn't want me to care for them because I'm a woman, or some of our learners or some of our colleagues have been turned away or asked for another provider because of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation. And so how do we navigate that? And that's a pretty unwelcoming experience, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of you here till like midnight studying. You put a lot of work in to do your given profession. We learn about DNA, you learn about everything at the microscopic level. I'll care for anyone. And so when on the receiving end of that, somebody doesn't want you to care for them, it hurts. I think there's a lot of emotions with that. I'll be the first to say I don't think I have the perfect answer. I think one of the things that we're doing at an institution is we recognize that we actually don't have a policy for that. So we're creating a dialogue of what do you do when that happens? Because, for most of us, we've gone into a health profession to help others, and part of that comes that people might not want our help. And so, one, we need to make sure that they're in a right mind. We know that they might be, are they having delirium, or are they, having some type of medical reason that they're not acting how they would, at their baseline? And then what do we do to evaluate that? Because I think it's hard. I've heard both sides of the argument. If you're removed from that situation, then we're just enabling that type of behavior. But if you stay in that situation, I think it can be really hard for that individual to continue to provide care if they know that they're not being welcomed or they're having incredibly derogatory things said to them. So I think the American Medical Association has kind of an algorithm that you can go through to try to help work through that situation. But I think it goes back to what Nisha just said was, I think we need to ask the provider in that situation of how it makes you feel, instead of, I think a lot of times we're just like, well, we'll do what we think is appropriate in that situation without talking to the individual from a supervising standpoint. And I think it goes back to creating more of that dialogue. And I mean, if there's anyone in the audience who might have a better idea, I think it's a tough decision. I always go back to, I think you have to talk to the person that it's happening towards, because just in the comments that were received, we had two opposite. One person said, I don't want to work in that environment, and another person commented and said, if you remove me from that situation, then it's just enabling the derogatory comments. So I'm not sure we're going to have a one-size-fits-all, but I think at least talking about it and acknowledging that we're not perfect and we have a lot of room to grow is another important step. So I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to comment, or people in the audience, but I think it goes back to listening and reminding that we're all the same in some way. I like to always talk about the Mountaineers, even if you don't like the Mountaineers, well, too bad, I do. So, it's always a good icebreaker for me, but be happy to have others or input from the audience.
I believe, and I would err on the side that as an institution, this is who we are. And it might be an uncomfortable situation. I hear a lot about our feelings, and I can't change someone's feelings. I hope to change their belief system, because their feelings are what they are. And I would reinforce that to the person, and to not focus on the feelings, but their belief system. And if they can change my belief system that my sexual orientation, my veteran status, or the color of my skin, it can some way impact their health care, then maybe I'll change my belief system. But they've got to provide the evidence for me. In God we trust, all others must bring data.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, for these situations, so for example, for my bariatric program, we have people sign a lot of contracts about compliance. They're going to stop smoking. They're going to come to their appointments, this and that and the other. And it helps us sort of enforce the values we're teaching in our program. And so for this type of situation, it sounds like there are some algorithms out there about how to handle these things. And I would challenge ourselves as a university to find one, tailor it, and use it so that we have a protocol to how to handle these situations, and also how to document these situations, because during the daytime, you know, normally there's residents who are supervised by an attending who's around. So during the day, these may be caught better, but let's say this happens at 2 in the morning in the emergency department is overfilled. This may be handled differently because, oh, we just need to move patients through. And I was very upset to read those comments about, you know, residents and providers having that experience. I haven't had that experience since I've been here, but it's very, it would be very painful as a physician who our lives are spent to make people healthy and keep people safe, to be rejected in that way. So I would challenge us to come up with a protocol, come up with a reporting system, and then on sort of, you know, on an administrative level, there is support there, I know, but to reinforce that and even check back in once that action or whatever has been made with how the patient felt about that, so we can capture how often this is happening. And my hope is that it's not happening frequently, but we really need to document and address it.
Great. Michelle?
One of the lines that I read that really stuck with me was, do no harm, but take no crap. You know, as a future doctor, I have been told again and again, do no harm. But as a human being, I want to be held at the same standard when it comes to receiving respect. I do not want my patients to be best friends with me. That's not what I'm expecting. But if someone doesn't want me to treat them because of my religious beliefs, the color of my skin, then I would want the institution that I'm working for stand with me and say that this is our person. If you don't feel comfortable, there are other hospitals out there that you could go to. But that's just my personal, that's just how I feel, that we need to take a stand, and we need to stand on the right side of history.
David, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it's important that people do have the right to their own beliefs, no matter how bigoted, no matter how narrow. But that right to their own belief does not mean that they can take that belief into the public square. And so what we have is a modicum of civility. No matter what the belief might be, there has to be this baseline of civility that we have within the institution. That's the thing that we try to enforce on a daily basis.
That's good. I'm going to ask Renee. So Renee, part of culture is the stories that we tell and that we represent as part of our history. So as we look at what Sam said and what David just said and what Sheila said, many other people, about having, trying to change belief systems, or at least sort of setting the baseline, how can we use stories, and what stories should people coming from this conference take away to share with others?
So one of the things as I was listening, and it's always fascinating to listen to people speak, I'm thinking to the first question about feeling awkward about asking people of different ethnic background about who they are and their experience. But this is where literature can help us. You know, I read lots of different authors. In fact, I'm teaching a class called Medicine and the Arts for the Honors College, and I realized that I had 3 authors that were either Indian or Indian American on my syllabus. And one of my students asked me if we were only reading Indian authors, which I thought was kind of great. But if you want to know about other people, read their stories. If you want to understand the African American experience, read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, beautiful writer who lays out his experience, or Toni Morrison. In medical literature, there are beautiful stories. I mean, thinking of Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, where he tells, you learn so much about his background by the way he tells about the death of his grandfather and his father, right? And if you're new to West Virginia, you can read, we have a lovely tradition of literature, and that might help you understand your patients more. you know, and I know it's always time. Well, I would do that if I had the time, right? And sometimes we just have to make that time. And one of the greatest things that I've learned from sitting with patients with cancer and listening to their stories is it's not even the written story that I'm handing back to them that's the most important thing. It's the time that I'm spending listening to their story of being a bus driver, their story of scuba diving, their story of their kids and grandkids.
So the next question I want to ask is that, so I have a personal belief, and my belief is, as I said earlier, that everybody's connected, we're all energy of the universe, even though we look different. And that instead of looking at things as right and wrong, and somebody mentioned about the, you know, the opposite of love and fear, maybe indifference, or maybe the lack of feeling connected, feeling part of a bigger frame. But I see a lot of people who are scared and feel isolated and alone, but a lot of this is creative expression. And it may be creative expression in a negative way, one way that we don't feel good about. But if we're all spirits with a human experience, then all of our life is, to me, like being in school. And as we die, maybe we go on summer vacation. So as we think of it from a different frame, from a different view, how would you guys respond to this idea that maybe there's not good and bad, good and evil, love and hate, which is the way that we see things, which is that dichotomy, but maybe it's just people that are trying to create in their own way, some of which have more light on their darkness and some that have less darkness on their light, but that it is part of the human evolving experience at a spiritual level. So how would you respond to that? To reframe how we might see things, because you know, when we saw Charlottesville, a lot of people saw, well, it's Nazi Germany, and it's the, you know, it's the signs of Dachau and all this. But I saw a lot of people that were just scared to death, and I saw so much fear and aloneness and isolation. I didn't really see good and evil there.
Well, I'll leave the good and evil for another discussion, because I believe there is good and there is evil, because I believe I've seen that, especially in a war zone. I will tell you that I think our lens needs to change, and by that, put on a different pair of glasses. One of my colleagues brought up to me in terms of just talking about these issues that there are sides of colleagues that we may not even be aware of. And one issue that would, they gave a very clear example of child care for someone who's a parent, and that child care for someone who's married with kids might be very different than for someone who is a single parent or a divorced parent or whatever, or you know, doesn't have another person to co-parent with. They also brought up the lens of someone who's, you know, got issues with domestic violence, and how, you know, we may be, you know, rush in to help someone. Oh my gosh, someone's sick in your family, let us help out. We'll have potlucks and everything. And then the minute, you know, something gets discussed about domestic violence, it's like, whoa, you know, that's a real conversation ender. And so I think the lens that we view, we have to put on a different lens. Period.
I couldn't agree more, because the whole idea of that we all need to look through things through our own cultural lens, through our own spectrum. And the more that we can look through the spectrum of other people, the better off we all are. I'll say something somewhat controversial just as an example. It's pretty controversial, this whole idea of Black Lives Matter. Some people take great umbrage with that idea of Black Lives Matter. Why isn't it all lives matter? But that's a cultural lens that we look through, because many of the proponents of Black Lives Matter, such as myself, we see it through the lens of history in terms of how Black lives were treated. And so inherent in that statement is that, of course, all lives matter, but basically Black Lives Matter too, or Black Lives Matter also. Another cultural lens could hear the same statement and hear it as if we're saying Black Lives Matter only. And so we really do have a spectrum that we look at information. And the more that we can start to look at information, not through just our cultural lenses, but through the cultural lens of others. And one of the ways you do that is reading the experiences of others, having true interactions with others, to be able to see how their worldview affects their opinion. And then we take it out of the spectrum of you're thinking bad, I'm thinking good, but you're just looking through a cultural lens.
And that we're not on different sides of the coin. It's just that we have our viewpoint perhaps shaded by different sides of the coin. You were going to say something, Michelle?
Oh, I was going to say that a wonderful leader gifted me with a book, Start With Why. And I think that that is the starting line for all of us in the context of being more inclusive and embracing diversity. Starting with why also starts in our thinking. We talk about the sight and what we see, the lens, but it's in our transformative thinking on how we see the world and how the world sees us. And I'm going to say something super maybe simplistic here, but I see Dr. Klink in the audience. Dr. Klink, you teach gross anatomy to dental students and medical students. When they come in and they're working with cadavers, when we take off this external suit, everything's the same, right? If we can get people to look at each other in that respect, more so than what they're seeing in our wardrobe and our experiences, I think we could be so much better off.
And I know
without dying first.
Yeah, without dying.
I know we have to wrap up, but I think this has been a very fruitful discussion, and I would just say to do that is how are you going to be part of that change? So we have people from every different school here, every different background. Many are from West Virginia, many may have moved here, but what can you do around you? And that's what I've become more aware with is be the change you want to see in the world, to quote Gandhi. What can you do? How can you go back to just your department or your section and find a way to cultivate diversity? It's about learning about one another. There's resources here to help, but take it as an action item going forward is how can you go first and help use this as a platform to kind of step forward and embrace more diversity.
Gaga has the question, and we're going to cut it off after his question. So, and then we're going to go and just have you guys make a final statement. Gaga.
So, since the media has, let's say, a large influence in affirming people's beliefs and affirming why they believe the things they do, I think one of the things we can start personally doing, especially when it comes to telling our stories, is most of us use social media, and we can tell stories via social media. We don't have to have identifying information in it. We don't have to have things that are too personal. But a story of being a bus driver in a town in rural West Virginia, that's something that counts. That's something that other people can see, and that's something that could be different or amusing or just peculiar to someone else. But what I'm trying to say is social media or media in general has contributed to many negative things, but we can also use it to contribute to many positive things. And also, in my personal experience, if you've ever had a conversation with me, it's a conversation with many questions on top of each other. But I think once a person tells you their beliefs, then you can simply ask the question, why? And it's not necessarily a derogatory why. When I've always asked the question why, it's always in the frame of tell me more. I want to learn about this. So I think we shouldn't be afraid to ask the question why, and we shouldn't feel that we are being derogatory if we ask the question why, because that's one of the things that tells a person you're interested in learning about them.
That's great. And before you answer Renee, I'm going to ask Renee to answer that or make her comments, and then what I'd like for you guys to go around and give your single best thought of what people should take out of this conference and what they can do to help build our community in a way that we want to live in. Please.
I just wanted to make a comment off of Ogaga's comment, and he took me around the Health Science Center about a week ago to look at statues that had gone up that I had not seen, and we went to each one. There's one out in front of the Fukushima auditorium, and then there's one over by the breast cancer doors. And we had lovely discussions about it, and I learned a lot that way. So sometimes being asked why can be a good thing. And my single thing that I think that you should take away is if there's someone in this room you don't know, introduce yourself.
Very good. Nisha.
One thing that I would want you guys to take from here is the line I said initially: do no harm but take no crap. Stand up for what you believe in. Ask why, and if it doesn't make sense, ask somebody else what would be the best thing to do, and have expectations from the institution that you're working for that they should stand with you if you're right.
I'm going to say believe in your hashtag selfie. You know, this forum started because I was like, I'm going to reach out because I think we should talk something about it. How are you going to use this very initial discussion to go back at a very smaller level and make some type of impact or continue the discussion? How can you kind of continue that message that we've really only started today?
And I would say that we need to get back to celebrating actually our differences, because really when you look at the American experience, it started with a document called the Constitution that was a very exclusionary document, but yet it was open to change. And so when you look at where we are now as to where we started, we're all part of something that is grand in the history of the world in terms of moving forward to include. When you look at the Constitution, women were not included, African Americans were not included, poor people were not included, but yet through the move forward of the freedom experience, we continue to include. And because of that, I think that we should celebrate one another, celebrate that we're a part of this great mosaic of history.
Very good.
I think one thing we can all do is keeping a very positive workplace, and if it can't be positive, professional. I'm not sure, you used a great term. How did you call it?
I wish I could remember it.
And
the
so,
baseline,
like,
civility.
Yeah, civility, and that goes back to language, what language we use with each other. And so, you know, my hope is that no one is in a work environment where people are using disrespectful language, but, you know, if that comes up, maybe finding a time where a person using disrespectful language, you don't need to call anyone out in front of a huge group, but maybe taking them aside and just saying, you know, this language maybe isn't the best for our work environment. Would you mind staying away from it in the future? Because I think us being able to communicate in a way that's respectful and no derogatory terms is a really nice way to move forward.
Okay, and we're going to finish up here quick because we've got 200 people out in the hallway, as I understand it.
Someone much wiser than me once said that our values are like our fingerprints. They go with us everywhere. They impact every person that we touch. And those of you that haven't really studied the WVU values, I have some cards here, and it starts out with service, curiosity, respect, accountability, and appreciation. In the center of that, the balance piece is respect. And I believe that respect is the fulcrum on which everything depends, particularly how we serve. Thank you.
I'll leave you with a couple of militarisms. Top cover and got your back. Part of the older people in the institution are part of the problem because we will let something roll off one shoulder and down the other. And the younger people are not going to let that happen. And the older people who have the authority and the positions need to stand with them and have their backs. I like the do no harm, take no crap, and I've got your back.
Good. And I would just say at the end, I would say look for the light and the miracle in each person that you see, because it is there if you can see it. So thank you very much, and we have to exit so the class can come in.